My 78th birthday came and went, and my own flesh and blood forgot it. Not a call, not a card, not even a text from my 3 children or their spouses. I sat in my quiet house, the chocolate raspberry cake I'd baked, their favorite mind you, sitting untouched on the counter, its icing hardening like my heart. I'd spent decades pouring my soul into this family, raising them, sacrificing for them, only to hear their laughter echo in my mind from the last time we were together. "Oh, was that today?" they'd said, chuckling as if my hurt was some kind of joke. At 78, after all I'd given, they'd reduced me to an afterthought, a relic they could ignore. But would I let their betrayal break me, or would I find a way to make them see the woman I still am? Will I get my revenge? Subscribe and let me know where you're reading from. Let's dive into this story together. My name is Matilda, and I was 78 when my world tilted on its axis. I've never been one for self-pity. I'm the kind of woman who gets up, dusts herself off, and keeps going. Born in a small Ohio town, I learned early that life doesn't hand you anything. My parents were factory workers, and I watched them scrape by, saving pennies for my future. I married George at 22, a kind man with a laugh that could light up a room, and together we built a life. We raised Eleanor, Thomas, and Grace in this very house, a 2-story colonial, with creaky floors and a garden I still tend with my own hands. George passed 28 years ago, leaving me to carry on alone. I did through grit, thrift, and a knack for investments that turned his modest life insurance into a nest egg worth $1.2 million. I'm proud of that, proud of the life I built, the kids I raised, the home I kept, but pride doesn't protect you from betrayal. That birthday was a milestone, or so I thought. 78 years of living, loving, losing, and still standing. I figured it deserved a nod. I didn't expect a parade, but a phone call, a visit, a simple happy birthday, Mom. I'd dropped hints for weeks. "Oh, it's coming up," I'd said to Eleanor over coffee, her eyes glued to her phone. "Maybe we'll have cake," I told Thomas when he swung by to borrow my lawnmower. Grace, my youngest, just nodded absently when I mentioned it during one of her rare visits. I even baked that cake, spent hours mixing the batter, picking fresh raspberries from my garden, thinking they'd show up, laugh, and sing like we used to when they were kids. By 9 p.m., the house was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock George loved. The cake sat there, mocking me. I called Eleanor first. "Mom, I'm swamped," she said, her voice clipped, loyally. "Work's insane." Thomas was next. "Oh shoot, Mom, the kids had soccer," slipped my mind. Grace didn't even answer. I left a voicemail, my voice steady, despite the ache in my chest. The next day I drove to Eleanor's for our monthly family dinner. It's a tradition I've kept up since George died, first Sunday of every month. No excuses. I pulled into her driveway, my old Buick humming, and carried in a tray of my homemade lasagna, the kind they all beg for. The house was loud when I walked in, Eleanor arguing with her husband, Mark, about some client, Thomas and his wife Karen, bickering over whose turn it was to host Christmas, Grace, scrolling her phone, snapping selfies for her brand. I set the table, smiled and waited. They ate, complimented the food, but barely looked at me. Finally, I couldn't hold it in. "Yesterday was my birthday," I said, my voice calm but firm. The room went quiet. Thomas froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Eleanor's eyes flicked up from her wineglass. Karen raised an eyebrow, smirking. Then Thomas laughed, a nervous barking sound. "Oh, was that today?" he said, like it was a trivial oversight, like forgetting to pick up milk. Karen leaned back, her lips curling. "You're too old for birthdays, Mom," she said, her tone teasing but sharp. Mark chuckled, and Grace giggled, covering her mouth like a schoolgirl caught gossiping. Eleanor, always the diplomat, said, "We'll make it up to you, Mom," but her eyes darted back to her phone. They all laughed, their voices overlapping, dismissing my hurt like it was nothing. I smiled, nodded, passed the garlic bread, but inside, something broke. I'd raised them to value respect, to cherish family, to honor the people who gave them everything. I'd stayed up nights helping with homework, driven them to practices, paid for college when George's death left us strapped. I'd given them down payments for their homes, babysat their kids, hosted every holiday, and now, they laughed. They mocked me for expecting them to care. I drove home that night, the road blurring through tears I refused to let fall. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo of George on my nightstand. He was smiling, his arm around me at Eleanor's wedding, back when the kids still looked at us like we mattered. They've forgotten us, I whispered. The hurt burned, raw and deep, but beneath it, a spark of defiance flickered. I wasn't just their mother, their bank, their cook. I was Matilda, widowed at 50, rebuilt my life, kept this family together. I wasn't invisible, not yet. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I paced the house, memories flooding back. The time Eleanor called me overbearing for asking about her marriage troubles. The way Thomas let Karen talk over me at Thanksgiving, her voice dripping with condescension. Grace's flippant texts, promising visits she never made. Their spouses were no better. Karen's snide comments about my old-fashioned ways. Mark's aloof silences. Lila's fake smiles when she bothered to show up. They all took me for granted, assumed I'd always be there waiting with open arms and an open wallet. But that laughter at Eleanor's table, it wasn't just forgetfulness, it was disrespect, a betrayal of everything I'd taught them, everything I'd given. I stopped pacing, and stood in my kitchen, the cake still sitting there, untouched. I cut a slice, ate it slowly, and let the bitterness mix with the sweet. "You're not laughing now, are you?" I said to the empty room. The spark of defiance grew into a flame. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let them forget me again. The weeks after my 78th birthday felt like carrying a boulder in my chest, heavy and cold. I'd always been the backbone of this family, Matilda, the one who held it together through every storm. I raised Eleanor, Thomas, and Grace with love and discipline, teaching them respect, loyalty, the value of family. After George died, I kept the traditions alive: Sunday dinners, Christmas mornings, summer barbecues in my backyard. I gave them everything: my time, my savings, my heart. Down payments for their houses, emergency loans when Thomas's business tanked, babysitting so Eleanor could climb the law firm ladder, cheering at Grace's art shows, even when she barely acknowledged me. All I asked in return was a shred of gratitude, a sign they saw me as more than a resource. But that birthday, their laughter, oh, was that today, cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just neglect, it was betrayal. I tried to shake it off. I'm not one to dwell. I've faced worse. Widowed at 50, I learned to fix my own plumbing, balance a budget, and turn George's $50,000 life insurance into a $1.2 million estate through careful investments. But this hurt lingered. I started noticing the slights I'd ignored for years. Eleanor, my eldest, was always too busy with her law firm, her voice crisp and impatient when I called. Last month she cancelled our weekly coffee because of a client emergency. Then I saw her spa day photos on social media, her nails freshly manicured, her smile carefree. Thomas, my middle child, let his wife Karen run their household, and her sharp tongue never missed a chance to jab. At a family picnic, she'd rolled her eyes when I offered to bring my potato salad, muttering, "Nobody eats that anymore." Grace, my youngest, was lost in her influencer world, posting about self-care while ignoring my texts for weeks. Her partner, Lila, was no better, offering fake sympathy with a smile that never reached her eyes. The slights piled up, each one a tiny cut. At my grandson's high school graduation, Karen forgot to save me a seat at the family table, leaving me to stand awkwardly with strangers. Thomas didn't notice, he was too busy clapping for his son. Eleanor sent me a birthday text 2 weeks late, a single line, "Sorry mom, meant to call," with a heart emoji, as if that erased the sting. Grace stopped by once, promising to make it up with a lunch date, but never followed through. Their spouses were worse. Mark, Eleanor's husband, barely spoke to me, his nose always in his phone or his golf game. Karen treated me like a burden, her comments laced with condescension. "You should sell that big house, Mom. It's too much for you." Lila, Grace's partner, acted sweet but dodged every family event, unless it suited her Instagram aesthetic. They all assumed I'd keep giving my time, my money, my love, without question. Then came the family barbecue at my house. A tradition I'd hosted for decades. I spent days preparing, mowing the lawn with my ancient push mower, grilling ribs until they were fall off the bone perfect, setting out flowers from my garden, in vases I'd inherited from my mother. I wanted it to be special, a chance to feel like a family again. They arrived late, complaining about the July heat, their kids glued to tablets. Eleanor checked emails between bites. Thomas and Karen argued about whose turn it was to do dishes. Grace snapped photos of the food but didn't eat. They left early, muttering about traffic, leaving me with a sink full of plates and a hollow ache. As I cleaned up, I overheard Karen talking to Mark by the driveway. "She's so clingy," she said, her voice low but clear, "always expecting us to drop everything for her." Mark snorted. "Old people, right? Always living in the past." I stood frozen in my kitchen, gripping the edge of the sink, the sponge dripping in my hand. Clingy, living in the past. I'd given them everything and they saw me as a nuisance. That moment crystallized it. This wasn't just about a forgotten birthday. It was disrespect, a slow erosion of the values I'd instilled. They didn't see me, Matilda, the woman who'd rebuilt her life after loss, who'd taught them to stand tall. They saw a bank account, a free babysitter, a relic to be humored. I dried my hands, walked my living room, and sat in George's old armchair, the one I hadn't reupholstered because it still smelled faintly of his aftershave. I looked at his photo on the mantel, his kind eyes crinkled in a smile. "What do I do, George?" I whispered. The answer didn't come right away, but the spark of defiance from that birthday night flared brighter. I wasn't going to beg for their love. I wasn't going to fade quietly. I'd make them see me one way or another. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I didn't want revenge, not exactly. I wanted justice, a way to reclaim my worth. I thought of my estate, the money I'd planned to split evenly among Eleanor, Thomas and Grace. It was meant to be their safety net, a gift from George and me. But why give it to people who laughed at my pain, who mocked my expectations of respect? I didn't have a plan yet, but the seed was planted. I poured my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and stared out at the garden where my roses were blooming despite the heat. "You're still here," I told myself, "and you're not done yet." The boulder in my chest didn't lighten, but it hardened into resolve. I'd spent weeks replaying that birthday, the laughter, the casual dismissals. Oh, was that today, and every slight that followed. My children, their spouses, they'd shown me who they were, not the family I'd raised to value respect and loyalty, but strangers who saw me as an obligation, a means to an end. I wasn't about to let them define me. I'd rebuilt my life once after George died, turned grief into $1 million estate through sheer will. I could rebuild again, not my heart, maybe, but my purpose. And it started with a plan. I've always been practical. Tears don't fix betrayal, action does. So I called Susan, my lawyer of 15 years, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp mind and sharper pen. I'd trusted her with my investments, my house deed, my will. She picked up on the second ring. "Matilda, everything okay?" she asked, her voice warm but curious. "I want to revise my will," I said. No preamble. There was a pause, then the rustle of papers. "Come by tomorrow," she said. "We'll talk." I hung up, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. This wasn't about spite, I told myself. It was about justice, about reminding my family that respect isn't optional. The next day I drove to Susan's office downtown, my Buick humming along the familiar route. Her office was a small, tidy space, with a view of the town square, where I used to take the kids for ice cream. She greeted me with a hug, her gray bob neatly tucked behind her ears. "What's going on, Matilda?" she asked, settling behind her desk. I took a breath and told her everything. The forgotten birthday, the laughter, the months of slights piling up like unpaid bills. Karen's clingy comment at the barbecue, Mark's snort about old people, Eleanor's spa day instead of our coffee, Thomas's silence, Grace's emojis. Susan listened, her face unreadable but her eyes soft. When I finished, she leaned back. So, the will. What do you want to do? I'd thought about it all night, staring at the ceiling while the grandfather clock ticked. My estate, $1.2 million. The house, my savings, was originally split 3 ways. Eleanor, Thomas, Grace, their spouses would benefit too, through them. It was meant to be a legacy, a piece of George and me to carry them forward. But why give it to people who didn't value me? I leaned forward. Half to a charity for neglected seniors, I said. There's a center in town, helps folks whose families have left them behind. The other half to a scholarship fund for single mothers going to college, women like I was. After George, Susan's pen paused over her notepad. You're sure? She asked, not judging, just checking. I nodded. I'm sure. She wrote it down, her face calm but her eyes flicking to mine. This'll stir things up, she said. I smiled, just a little. Good. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. Instead I watched my family closer, testing my decision. At the next family dinner I dropped a hint, casual as could be. I've been thinking about my legacy, I said, passing the mashed potatoes. Eleanor's fork stilled, her lawyer brain clicking. Thomas glanced at Karen, who smirked like she knew something I didn't. Grace just scrolled her phone. Legacy, Karen said, her tone syrupy. You mean that big house? It's such a hassle for you, Mom. Thomas jumped in too eager. You ever think about downsizing? Free up some cash? Eleanor, always strategic, offered to look over my estate papers, her voice smooth as silk. I smiled, said I'd think about it. Their greed was subtle but glaring, like sunlight through a cracked window. They didn't ask about me, my health, my days. They assumed my money was theirs, a prize waiting to be claimed. To be sure, I started volunteering at the senior center I'd mentioned to Susan. I'd been there before, helping with bingo nights, but now I went deeper. I met Clara, a 75-year-old widow whose daughter hadn't called in 3 years. They think we're done living, Clara said over tea, her hands trembling but her eyes fierce. I nodded, thinking of Karen's smirk, Mark's snort. I met others, men and women left to fend for themselves, their families too busy or too callous to care. Their stories mirrored mine, each one a thread in the tapestry of my hurt. At the diner down the street, I chatted with single moms working double shifts, their dreams of college stalled by bills and childcare. They reminded me of myself at 50, widowed, scared but determined. My decision felt right. My money could do more for them than for my entitled kids. Back home, I kept up appearances. I hosted a small lunch for Grace, who showed up an hour late with Lila, both of them distracted. I mentioned the senior center, testing her. That's nice, Mom, Grace said, barely looking up from her phone. Lila nodded, fake sweet. So generous of you. Neither asked why I was there, why I cared. Thomas stopped by to check on the house, his eyes lingering on the antique hutch George and I bought at a flea market. This place is a lot to maintain, he said, fishing. I shrugged. I manage. Eleanor called once, offering legal advice I didn't ask for, her tone clipped like I was a client. Each interaction confirmed it. They didn't see me, but they were. I sat in my garden that evening, the roses blooming despite a late frost. George used to say my stubbornness was my superpower. You don't bend, Matt. He'd laugh. I didn't bend now. I sipped my tea, the plan solidifying. They'd forgotten me, but I'd make sure they remembered. Not with anger, but with a choice that would outlast me. A legacy not of money, but of respect for myself, for others like me. The boulder in my chest felt lighter, just a little. The plan was set, my will rewritten, but I held it close, like a card I wasn't ready to play. I wanted the moment to be right, to hit them where it hurt, not out of cruelty, but to wake them up. I'd learned timing matters. My children and their spouses had shown me their priorities, careers, phones, petty dramas, while I'd been relegated to the background, a forgotten prop in their busy lives. Their laughter on my birthday, Karen's clingy jab, Mark's snort about old people, Those weren't just slights, they were a dismissal of everything I'd built, everything I was. I wasn't going to beg for their respect. I'd demand it, one way or another. I chose a Sunday dinner, 6 months after that lonely birthday, to lay it all bare. I invited them to my house, calling it a special family gathering. They grumbled. Eleanor had a deposition, Thomas and Karen had a thing with the kids. Grace was vague about content deadlines, but they agreed to come. I spent days preparing, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted the contrast to be stark. I roasted a chicken, golden and crisp, made creamy mashed potatoes, baked an apple pie with cinnamon from my pantry. The table was set with my best china, the plates George and I bought for our 10th anniversary, candles flickering in the center. My garden roses sat in a vase, their scent filling the air. I wore my favorite blue dress, the one that still fit perfectly, my silver hair pinned up. I looked like the matriarch I was, not the invisible old woman they'd made me feel. They arrived late, as expected. Eleanor rushed in, her briefcase still in hand, muttering about traffic. Thomas and Karen trailed behind, their kids glued to tablets, Karen's heels clicking impatiently. Grace and Lila showed up last, Grace in a trendy jumpsuit, Lila snapping photos of my front porch for aesthetic. They barely noticed the table, the effort, the roses. Dinner was loud, Eleanor debating some legal case with Mark, Karen complaining about her boss, Thomas scrolling sports scores. Grace posted a picture of the pie, captioning it "Vintage Vibes." I sat quietly, serving seconds, smiling when they bothered to look my way. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. This was it. After dessert, I stood tapping my glass with a spoon. The room hushed, more from surprise than respect. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice clear, carrying the weight of 78 years. Their phones were still out, their eyes half-focused. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, Thomas leaned back, Karen smirked like she was waiting for a punchline. I took a breath, feeling George's presence in the room, his strength in my spine. "I've changed my will." That got their attention. Phones lowered, eyes snapped to me. My estate, the house, the savings, all $1.2 million of it, is no longer yours. Half goes to a charity for neglected seniors, people whose families forgot them, the other half to a scholarship fund for single mothers trying to get through college. You get nothing. The silence was heavy, like the air before a storm. Then it broke. Eleanor's voice came first, sharp and loyally. "What? Mom, that's insane. You can't just." Thomas cut in, his face red. "This is a joke, right? After everything we've done." Karen laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Selfish. That's what this is. Selfish." Grace's eyes filled with tears, her voice small. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" Lila just stared, her phone forgotten. Mark muttered something about legal recourse. They shouted over each other, accusations flying. Ungrateful, crazy, unfair. Not one of them asked why. Not one apologized for my birthday, for the years of slights, for laughing at my pain. They only cared about the money, their voices raw with entitlement. I let them rage, standing tall, my hands clasped in front of me. When they paused for breath, I spoke. "You laughed when you forgot my birthday. You mocked me for expecting respect. I gave you everything, my time, my love, my home, down payments, babysitting, dinners like this one, and you gave me excuses. Too busy, clingy, old people living in the past." I looked at each of them, my gaze steady. "This is my legacy now, not you." Karen's face twisted, and she stormed out, Thomas trailing her like a scolded dog. Eleanor tried to argue, citing legal options, but I cut her off. Susan made it airtight. "Don't waste your breath." Grace sobbed, reaching for my hand, but I stepped back. "You had your chance," I said softly. Lila followed her out, silent. Mark lingered, muttering about fixing this, then left too. The house was quiet again. The candles burned low. I cleared the plates, my movements slow but sure. The boulder in my chest was gone, replaced by something lighter. Not joy, not yet, but relief. I'd said my piece. They'd seen me, maybe for the first time in years. I sat in George's armchair, his photo on Nizian. I'd made my choice, and it felt right. The aftermath of that dinner was like a storm that left the air clearer but the ground scarred. My children and their spouses didn't take my decision quietly. Eleanor called daily for a week, her voice swinging between tearful pleas and lawyerly threats. "Mom, this isn't you," she'd say, as if she knew me better than I knew myself. "We can contest this." I'd reply calmly, "Susan's the best, you won't win." Thomas sent a long email blaming Karen for tensions, but never mentioning my birthday or the years of neglect. Grace showed up once, eyes red, promising to do better, her words earnest but fleeting. When I didn't budge on the will, her visits stopped. Their spouses were worse. Karen left a voicemail calling me vindictive. Mark sent a formal letter requesting a meeting, and Lila posted a vague Instagram story about family drama with a sad emoji. I didn't respond. I'd said my piece at the dinner and I meant it. Respect wasn't negotiable. I'd learned that love doesn't mean letting people walk over you. I still loved my kids, always would, but love didn't mean handing them my life's work when they couldn't spare a call for my birthday. I told them the door was open, if they showed respect, if they showed up for me the way I'd shown up for them. They didn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty, though. It was space, and I filled it with something new. I threw myself into the causes I'd chosen. The senior center became my second home. I helped organize their monthly luncheons, sat with folks like Clara, whose stories of abandon mirrored mine. Clara became a friend, her sharp humor and quiet strength a balm for my bruised heart. We'd sip tea, swap stories, laugh about the stubbornness that kept us going. "You're a firecracker, Matilda," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "They don't know what they lost." I also worked with Susan to set up the scholarship fund for single mothers. I met with the local college, helped draft the criteria, women balancing work, kids and dreams, just like I had after George died. The first recipient, a 32-year-old named Maria, sent me a thank you note that made me cry. "You've given me a future," she wrote. I framed it, hung it in my kitchen next to George's photo. My days took on a rhythm, mornings in my garden, tending roses that bloomed brighter than ever, afternoons at the senior center or the diner, chatting with the waitresses, women who called me Auntie Matt and slipped me extra coffee, evenings in George's armchair, reading or listening to the radio, the house no longer heavy with absence. I wasn't alone anymore. The gratitude from strangers, elders who felt seen, mothers who saw hope, filled the hole my family left. I'd built a community, not of blood, but of shared strength. There were moments of doubt, late at night when the house creaked and memories crept in. Eleanor's first steps, Thomas's gap-toothed grin, Grace's crayon drawings pinned to the fridge. I'd wonder if I'd been too harsh, if I should have given them another chance. But then I'd remember Karen's smirk, Mark's snort, the way they laughed at my birthday like it was nothing. I'd remember Clara's trembling hands, Maria's note, the faces at the senior center. My choice wasn't about punishment, it was about purpose. I'd given my kids everything, and they'd chosen to forget me. I wasn't forgetting myself. One evening, a year after that dinner, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, the air cool and sweet with rose scent. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold. I looked at George's photo, now on my patio table, his smile steady as ever. "I did it," I told him. "I chose me." The hurt still lingered, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by something stronger: pride. I'd built a life after George's death, raised 3 kids alone, turned pennies into a fortune, and now, at 78, I'd built something new, a legacy that wasn't about money but about respect, for myself and for others like me. My family forgot me, but I didn't forget who I was, and that was enough. I stood brushing dirt from my hands, and went inside to bake a cake, chocolate raspberry, just for me. I lit a single candle, made a wish for peace, and blew it out. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was